Well, this is Brexit Night Live as we continue the countdown to the moment that the UK leaves the European Union. Well, let's take a look at what some of tomorrow's newspapers are making of the UK's imminent departure then from the EU, this historic moment. Tonight I'm joined here in Downing Street by the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha, and The Sun's political editor, Tom Newton Dunn. Welcome. The countdown clock is behind us. 21 minutes to go and counting. But obviously a seismic moment for the newspapers, many of whom have campaigned for this moment. So let's take a look, shall we, at the front pages. And picturing jubilant scenes in Parliament Square, the Eye asks, what next? The Times keeps it simple with their headline, farewell to EU. In the wake of Brexit, the Mirror implores their readers, now build the Britain we were promised. The Guardian is in a poignant mood, the day we said goodbye. In a call for unity, The Sun declares, make leave, not war. With additional scrutiny likely on European goods entering the UK, The Telegraph declares Johnson ramps up pressure on the EU. That's the FT, isn't it? Britain finally cuts EU ties, their headline. And the Daily Mail, as you can see, how many more UK victims of the virus deciding to go on the coronavirus, which has now reached the UK. So let's talk more. Sonia Sodha and Tom Newton Dunn are here. How are you both feeling?
It's a bit odd, I have to say. Out there on Whitehall, it's an odd mood. It's a mixture between a sort of royal wedding with patriotic people covered in Union Jacks and some slightly unsavoury characters who definitely in the pub too long and singing too many Tommy Robinson songs for my liking. So it's a little strange. Here we all are. But where's the Prime Minister? He's inside. He doesn't want to come out because he will look too triumphal. He's going to leave that to Nigel Farage. So all in all, it's a slightly odd atmosphere.
Sonia?
I feel quite sad. I suppose we've had 6 weeks to prepare for this moment. It was always very clear this is where we were headed on the 12th of December last year when Boris Johnson got his kind of decisive election victory. So it was always very clear that we were going to end up here. But yeah, I think standing in front of this massive countdown clock really just makes it real, really, that it's about to happen. And I think it's been 3.5 years coming. There were moments, actually, where there were questions about whether we'd actually ever get here at all. So it feels like a very historic occasion.
Well, there we go, 19 minutes, 35 seconds, the countdown on, red, white and blue all over this dark brick of number 10 Downing Street, the private party underway inside. But let's listen, first of all, to what Boris Johnson had to say a little bit earlier.
Tonight, we are leaving the European Union. For many people, this is an astonishing moment of hope, a moment they thought would never come. And there are many, of course, who feel a sense of anxiety and loss. And then there's a third group, perhaps the biggest, who had started to worry that the whole political wrangle would never come to an end. I understand all those feelings, and our job as the government, my job, is to bring this country together now and take us forward. The most important thing to say tonight is that this is not an end, but a beginning. This is the moment when the dawn breaks and the curtain goes up on a new act in our great national drama. And when I look at this country's incredible assets, our scientists, our engineers, our world-leading universities, our armed forces, when I look at the potential of this country waiting to be unleashed, I know that we can turn this opportunity into a stunning success. And whatever the bumps in the road ahead, I know that we will succeed.
So Boris Johnson there deciding to pre-record that address to the nation and not make it, as you said, outside number 10. It's beginning to be an unusual way of doing things, a little bit like Mr. Trump or even the Sussexes, Harry and Meghan, who go straight to their audience and not via us lot, I suppose.
And not uncontroversial. There are two other broadcasters tonight. You're only using a few clips. No broadcasters are playing out the whole thing. BBC and ITV are not using any of it on a point of principle because they wanted to be able to record it. You know, this is the way Boris Johnson wants to do his media. It's it's going to be different. But what he's actually saying, the content of it, I mean, we're certainly reporting, all the papers are reporting it. It's really interesting that there is no sense of triumphalism, really. There's quite a lot of optimism, and that we know Boris is famous for, the sunny uplands and let's go forward together. But, he's not outside, he's not doing the celebration. And I think what he's most keen on is, in fact, he actually says this at one point, the most important thing to say tonight, this is a beginning, not an end. He's very keen now to try and move the nation on together and away from the appalling splits of the last 4 years.
Let's take a look at some of the papers then. Your paper to start with, The Sun, going make leave not war, picturing Boris Johnson on the front there. What is the point that your paper's making tonight? One of those that has campaigned for Brexit.
Yeah, I think we're trying to really emphasise what the PM is saying. This is now time for all of us to move on. I think the celebrations about Brexit and winning the referendum, etc., are really for yesteryear. From tomorrow morning, this is all about a country existing on its own outside of the EU, although of course we'll still be under all the rules for the period of transition. And it's all about how we then going to strike what is a myriad of different new rules, relationships on farming, fishing, customs, immigration, absolutely everything. There is almost a new country to design in a very, very short period of time. I think that's the most interesting thing going forward.
Sonia.
I think Tom's absolutely right. So Boris Johnson was always going to come out and be very optimistic this evening, I think, in what he said to the country. But tomorrow is when the hard work really starts. And, it's been 3.5 years sort of working up to this moment when we actually leave the EU. But actually, none of the really hard decisions about what our future relationship looks like have actually been fleshed out yet. So that's all got to happen in the next 11 months.
Which is the eye, isn't it? What next? That is the big crucial question here.
Absolutely.
Everyone sort of seems to have parked, don't they, since the stonking majority that the Conservatives won at the election.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think all of these questions are going to be reopened again. Up till now, Boris Johnson's always said, it's going to be easy. We can have it all. There aren't any really tough trade-offs here. We'll make this work. And actually, we know that there are some very painful trade-offs that are involved in leaving the European Union. And that's something really that Boris Johnson's going to have to get his head around now. And the next stage is actually pretty focused. It's only 11 months. There's a huge amount of work to do. Normally, free trade agreements take years, not months to negotiate. So it's going to be quite, this is going to feel like a nice moment for Boris Johnson, Prime Minister. It's going to feel like the culmination of his election victory. But I think it is going to get much tougher for him from here on in.
OK, let's take a look at the eye then. What next there? Pictures of celebrations, obviously, in Parliament Square. And our next paper is The Guardian. Let's take a look at The Guardian. The day we said goodbye. Picture there, whimsically, obviously, The Guardian, one of those newspapers that simply does not want this to happen.
And they've got a lovely picture of a British bulldog looking desperately miserable on their masthead as well, under the headline, missing you already. Well, could be missing you already. So look, every paper is going to serve.
I always get that wrong when I have to say that, yes.
Missing you already. This is the pun that never stops giving. So every paper is going to be representing its own personal feeling on Brexit to suit its readers' choices.
Indeed so. And elsewhere, obviously, the newspapers, really, we've found out, didn't we, that the Mirror, let's take a look at the Mirror. What's their theme there? Now build the Britain we were promised, they're saying. And once again, looking out almost whimsically at the distant lands and the future.
And I think the Mirror actually is representing a sentiment that a lot of people who voted Remain in 2016 will be feeling, which is that the country was promised a lot in 2016 in the referendum campaign. Politicians like Boris Johnson and Michael Gove said that if we were going to leave the EU, it would solve all sorts of problems. There'd be plenty more cash for our public services. We'd get control back of our own laws. And really, I think the feeling is now, well, you've kind of got what you wanted. It's up to you to deliver. And so I think that's kind of what the sentiment that the Mirror is really expressing tonight. And I suspect there'll be quite a few people in the country who feel like that.
And the Telegraph was pointing out, I know Christopher Hope was pointing out earlier, that actually their paper was the only one that did not vote for Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. They're fully supportive of this harder Brexit, which is now on offer under Boris Johnson. Dunn.
The thing about Brexit is, for me, what's absolutely so fascinating, there are so many sliding doors moments in the last 4 years or so. If something had gone a little bit differently, we'd be in a different place, we'd have a different type of Brexit, maybe there'd be no Brexit at all. You know, if 20 more, 30 more MPs had voted for Theresa May still rather than against it, then we would have left early on under certainly a lot softer Brexit. You know, those MPs decided not to do that on that certain day. Theresa May could have won a majority. I mean, all these different things have led us to where we are. You know, what's fascinating about Brexit is, you know, we've been in uncharted territory really from the moment of January or June the 24th, the day after the referendum. So it is being made up as we go along. Now, that's either incredibly exciting or incredibly scary, depending on your viewpoint of things. But that's not going to stop just because that clock hits 11 o'clock tonight. You know, this is going to continue to evolve in a, I would suggest, wholly unpredictable fashion, not just till the end of the year, but for many further years more.
Yes, and we saw the headline there in the Telegraph that Boris Johnson is ramping up pressure on the European Union. Michael Gove dispatched today to say, actually, it is divergence we want. The suggestion being, obviously, that they would walk away. Now that, they look back at the mistakes they say that Theresa May made when she was in charge. One, she had no plan. Two, she never threatened enough. Are they trying to try and stop those mistakes?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I mean, Theresa May had her line, didn't she? No deal is better than a bad deal. So actually, you know, that Telegraph front page feels quite familiar to me. We've had Brexiteers like Boris Johnson say before, you know, we're going to play hardball here in order to get exactly what we want. We're going to negotiate in a really, really tough manner. And I think actually viewers, I mean, I think a lot of people will be hoping, well, that's it. We've left now. Surely we don't have to talk about Brexit anymore. We are going to be talking about Brexit a lot for years to come. And the debate is going to feel very familiar. So on the one hand, something is resolved, we've left. But on the other hand, we're going to hear all the same political tropes come back again and again about talking tough, no deal's better than a bad deal, we need to keep the cliff edge. So it's not as over as I think people might like to think.
The only note of caution I would add into that is, you know, from tomorrow onwards, we bring in a new phase, which is a very intense 11-month negotiation. Therefore, everything that comes out of politicians' mouth, both in London and in Brussels, is to be taken with an ocean worth of salt. It is designed to try and have effect on the other side of the negotiation. Do not read too much into it. Do not take them too literally. And quite frankly, we can actually all turn off for a good 3 or 4 months, turn back on again in May or June, and we might be a bit closer to the argument. Probably won't.
Let's see the clock if we can as well. We've got a wide shot of that because there's just 10 minutes to go for all of those of you at home who've been praying for this moment, and those, of course, who have simply been dreading it as well. Just 10 minutes to go until the UK exits the European Union. It was back in 1973 after the French president had multiple times said no to the UK, that they weren't allowed to join, that finally we were taken in, weren't we? And over the years, there's been more alignment, which has certainly made many people increasingly unhappy. You think of the likes of the famous Eurosceptic MPs in Parliament, the Maastricht Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, those things that they felt literally stepped people away from the European Economic Community area. Thank you very much indeed. We'll see you with a better look at the newspapers and more of them, hopefully, at 11:30. Thank you. Well, we're going to leave the papers there for now as we look towards 11 o'clock and the moment of Brexit, the moment that will, for good or ill, usher in a new era for this country. Well, welcome back to Downing Street on the night that the UK finally left the European Union, a defining moment reflected across the morning's newspapers, as you might expect. So in the next half hour, we will see what's making the headlines tonight here in Downing Street with the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha, and The Sun's political editor, Tom Newton Dunn. Thank you very much indeed for coming on what has been a momentous occasion, no doubt. So as ever, let's start with those front pages, shall we? And the Eye, first of all, picturing jubilant scenes in Parliament Square. The Eye asks, what next? The Express is positively rapturous, proclaiming, rise and shine, it is a glorious new Britain. In a call for unity, The Sun declares, make leave, not war. The Times keeps it simple with their headline, farewell to you or EU. In the wake of Brexit, the Mirror implores their readers, now build the Britain we were promised. The Guardian is in a poignant mood, the day we said goodbye. With additional scrutiny likely on European goods entering the UK, the Telegraph declares Johnson ramps up the pressure on the European Union. Britain finally cuts EU ties, proclaims the Financial Times, which quotes the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, saying that trade talks with the UK will take up the majority of the Union's agenda for the next year. Quite surprisingly, perhaps, the Daily Mail opts not to lead with Brexit and instead goes with the diagnosis of the first 2 cases of coronavirus in the UK. And never want to go with the grain, the Star goes with a story about the TV presenter Declan Donnelly's dog. Not even him, it's about his dog. Anyway, we're joined, as you can see, by Sonia Sodha and Tom Newton Dunn. It's been amazing this evening in some respects, hasn't it? The party outside in Parliament Square, hearing from around the country in places like Scotland where it feels like a wake. The UK is still divided despite the calls for unity and coming together from the Prime Minister.
Yeah, and I think in moments like this, when everyone is forced to think about Brexit all over again, no matter how much you want to move on, all those divisions are going to come up. And I think any which way you voted in 2016, most people are going to be remembering that right here and now. The whole point of the Prime Minister's address to the nation, although not many in the nation necessarily saw it, because a lot of the broadcasters refused to film it, which is another story which we don't necessarily get into.
Because it was pre-recorded by number 10 Downing Street.
And broadcasters correctly say, well, look, we should be filming the Prime Minister, you shouldn't be putting in propaganda videos, it's kind of not fair. Anyway, his point is, now we move on, now we go forward, please let's concentrate on this bright future I'm going to deliver for you, and let's bury all the demons of the past and go forward together. And his key phrase in that message is, and he says the words, this is the most important thing about tonight, is this is a new beginning, not an end.
OK, well, let's go to a Brexit-supporting newspaper to start with, The Express. Rise and shine, it's a glorious new Britain, full of enthusiasm there for what has just happened.
Well, I think no one's going to be surprised about the tone and tenor of the Express front page, given how long this is this is a newspaper who's campaigned for Brexit over the years. So it won't come as a surprise to its readers. And the papers are very divided tonight, depending on what stance they've taken on the whole referendum question. The Express has obviously been incredibly supportive of Brexit. So I think Boris Johnson, when he sort of looks at tomorrow's newspapers, he'll be pleased to see that the papers that have always kind of supported Brexit thus far, they got behind his deal, they got behind him at the general election, and now they're striking a very positive tone. And it's that positive tone which the Prime Minister tried to echo in his recorded remarks earlier this evening. And there was a lot of optimism in there. It was quite funny, as a lot of it wasn't actually even about Europe. It was about better schools and a better NHS and investment in the country's infrastructure. And a lot of people might hear that and say, well, what's that got to do with you leaving the European Union? Hospitals and schools don't have a lot to do with that. He's really, as Tom's just said, he's really sort of emphasising the idea that this is a new chapter in British history. The thing is, though, is that obviously we've left the European Union tonight. It's been 3.5 years in the making. There is still a huge number of questions to be resolved. Really, the withdrawal agreement doesn't resolve very many of them at all. There's this big question about our future relationship with the EU, a very short time scale, 11 months to get that negotiated. So we're going to be hearing a lot more about Brexit after tonight.
Well, Tom, let's look at your paper, The Sun, Make Leave Not War, while we digest what number 10's strategy is now. And is it, what Sonia was saying there, is to make us feel like it's all gone away? Do they want to start focusing on other matters, on school funding or whatever it might be, and actually quietly in the background work hard for this ferocious 11 months of trade negotiations?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot going on actually with that. I mean, I'm quite pleased with our front page now. Actually, if you think, back in the day we used to up yours to laws and all those, horrendous EU bashing front pages. That is not a front page I think many people would be particularly expecting from us, and it's certainly the tone the Prime Minister is trying to strike. There's an awful lot.
Just explain the strategy of that then. Why are you being so placatory almost, if I can put it that way?
I think, for the very same reason, you probably have to get the editor on to explain that. I just work here, Gav, but I would suspect, for the same reasons why we're not seeing Boris Johnson standing in front of a lectern outside of that door now, where he's leaving all that to Nigel Farage, simply because he doesn't want to look Trumpist. And if this nation is going to move on and ever unite ever again, we're going to have to start doing it together. Exactly what the Archbishop of Canterbury was saying this morning. We will succeed only if we unite. Now, there's an awful lot going to happen this year. Sonia's absolutely right. There is an absolute mountain to climb, not just doing a trade deal with the EU and also with the rest of the world. There are 20 rollover trade deals that we still need to do with countries around the world the EU has and we don't have come December the 31st, 2020, the end of this year. So all these have to be sorted out. There's then a myriad of domestic changes. We need our own immigration system we need to design. Now that's going to be a pretty large job. A fisheries system, an agriculture system, a new customs and tariff system. I mean, everything, absolutely everything needs to be done afresh at the same time.
Yes.
Boris Johnson needs to appease that red wall of former Labour seats. He managed to, scoop off Jeremy Corbyn, his extraordinary general election result, and deliver for them. And that, Sonia's right. That means infrastructure, NHS, more police, all the stuff doesn't necessarily have everything to do with Brexit. So I think, and interestingly, talking to a few people quite close to him today, he's acutely conscious of this need to deliver now. He is the man famous for writing massive promises, massive checks, and interestingly, he now absolutely accepts, as I understand it, he really starts to start cashing them, and as soon as humanly possible.
And looking at The Guardian, the day we said goodbye, despite the efforts perhaps of Number 10 not to sound triumphalist, there will be people who are utterly miserable about this, who believe the fears that we will indeed be squashed between the superpowers of China and the United States, that we are a small nation, as the Guardian said on the Brexit Day paper, that really will have nowhere to go, and we're deluded thinking we have a big standing in the world. Do you think that reflects this whimsical-looking paper there of longing for the olden days of the EU?
Well, I think that's absolutely. I mean, The Guardian is at the other end of the spectrum compared to the Express's front page we just saw. So absolutely, that's reflected there in The Guardian's front page. In fact, we haven't even gone with a news story on our front page. We've got a column by my colleague, Jonathan Friedland, sort of talking about what it means, what this moment kind of might mean to the country. And I think, yes, the country is still divided. There probably are a chunk of people who just want, Brexit to go away and never to hear about it again. But there are some people for whom this is a massively victorious evening, an evening for celebration, but some people who are really anxious. And I think that's kind of completely understandable, actually. We were promised so much in the 2016 referendum campaign about what Brexit would mean. More money for public services, control over our own laws, these amazing trade deals around the world that are going to, sort of rain down like manna from heaven. And, now is really crunch time. Boris Johnson has got a majority of 80. He doesn't have any excuses anymore. He can't blame Parliament and MPs for trying to stop Brexit. Brexit has happened, and all eyes are going to be on him and his government. And there are a number of very difficult decisions they need to make, as Tom's already outlined, and there's not a lot of signs that thinking has gone on.
Yes, the Times are playing it fairly straight. Farewell to you, or EU. I never know quite how to say it.
You've got to use it's the pun, isn't it?
It's you, I know. We saw a projection, Sky News' projection on the White Cliffs of Dover there. The UK has left the EU. I put it to the Chancellor earlier this evening. It doesn't take many weeks of people queuing for hours at the port of Dover or in Calais trying to get their goods backwards and forwards, where this idea of divergence, which we're going to hear more about next week from the Prime Minister, for that to unravel quite quickly. There are real dangers, aren't there, with pulling away from the European Union and closer alignment, which is something that Theresa May tried to deliver and failed.
Yeah, and we heard Michael Gove this morning, very interestingly, begin to try and lay that out. And he was asked quite directly, I think, on Sky News and other channels, but surely you can't get frictionless trade with the EU and be able to diverge. And he said, you're absolutely right. There will be some friction, but that's a price worth paying, I think, for regaining our sovereignty. That's his view. So I think what's going to be...
How do they work out what that friction is going to look like? Because do they have modelling?
Yeah.
Do they really know that actually there'll be 85 extra lorries at that specific point, which makes that queue 15 times longer than it would have been? It's really hard to ascertain what price you pay for what you want to deliver.
Absolutely right, and that's a massive calculation of them to do in their own heads, and how much are they prepared to put up with, and all these things, there are multi-dimensions for. But I think on the flip side of that, we have been in this game now for some 3 years talking about all this, and I won't bore you with a myriad of different tedious names we've come up with all, but there are ways of maximum facilitating trade across borders, but to pre-declarations, paying tariffs in advance. There may well be no tariffs if Boris Johnson gets his way. There'll have to be some checks on both sides of the cross-channel borders because of does it feel wrong to talk all about all of that tonight? I don't know, because the Eye poses that question: what next? The floating of Canada. Do people care right now? Well, we're going to be doing it for
what we're going to be doing?
Yeah. Maybe not tonight, because we're doing it for 11 very long.
But anyway, tell me about Canada anyway.
No, well, and I think this is this is going to feel like the high point for Boris Johnson, actually, when we look back. This is a night when the culmination of his election victory, but we're going to start getting into this very tough, difficult stuff very, very quickly. And the problem with Canada and this Canadian-style free trade agreement that the government says it wants is that all of the economic forecasts say that the country is going to take a hit as a result. Some of the areas that are going to be hardest hit, the forecasts predict, are areas of the country that the Conservatives started to do quite well in the general election, the so-called red wall seats, so seats that were formerly Labour in the north and in the Midlands. Those areas are going to be harder hit by a very hard Brexit, a Canada-style Brexit. So that's going to create real difficulties, political difficulties, I think, for the Prime Minister and store them up over the next 2 years. So I don't think I think actually we're going to see, sure, we've got 11 months, there'll be some agreement reached, but actually it's not really going to feel that different for quite a long time yet.
Very quickly.
We will see the first beginnings of all this on Monday morning when the Prime Minister makes his big speech about what next. We will see there, is he now already going to be prepared to set the scenes for some compromises, or is he going to be very belligerent and offer cakeism? He wants to have his cake and eat it. It will all be about this message he wants to send. It'll be the first salvo of the negotiation. I'm told, expect cakeism, don't expect any compromises yet.
Oh, really? I was told he's going to be frank on his ambitions for the negotiations. We will see.
We've
certainly.
Heard that before, haven't we?
Well, well. Monday morning, then, clearly, another date for your diary. The deadline, though, is tight. We'll be taking a look at what pressure Boris Johnson can put on the EU to get his way after this break.